My name is Allison. I'm 34 years old, currently living and working in Chicago. I founded a small media company, and after nearly 10 years of effort, I finally bought a house of my own, a quiet space, a sense of freedom, and the greatest achievement I had ever reached. But in just one evening, everything I had built with sweat and sacrifice was nearly turned into shared property. At my mother's 60th birthday party, in the middle of glowing lights and the chatter of dozens of relatives, my younger sister Vanessa suddenly stood up, lifted a glass of red wine, and with a smile declared, "Starting next week, I'll be moving into Allison's house." She already agreed. The entire room burst into applause, congratulations echoing as if I had just done something noble. My parents beamed with pride, nodding in approval as though this was a plan the whole family had agreed on beforehand. Only me, the actual owner of the house, stood frozen, unable to say a word, because I had never promised anything at all. Have you ever had your family arrange something important for you in front of everyone, as if your opinion didn't matter? If you've ever been in that position, leave a comment below. Hit like on this video if you've ever felt taken advantage of in your own home, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of the story. Because what happened afterward went far beyond anything I could have imagined. I stood in the crowded room, the crystal chandelier above scattering cold light across the half-full glass in my hand. The laughter, the toasts, the clinking of silverware against porcelain plates crashed in my ears like waves pounding a cliff. While everyone celebrated a decision I had never spoken, I could only stand there like stone. My mother leaned toward Aunt Caroline, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. "See? Everything's fine. Allison has finally opened up." Caroline nodded in satisfaction, her eyes flicking toward me as if I should feel honored to be given such a responsibility. Meanwhile, my father poured more wine for the guests, his deep voice cheerful. "Vanessa needs a quiet place to get her life back on track. Allison's house is perfect, peaceful, spacious, everything she could need. What could be more precious than sisters supporting each other?" Under the table, I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. No one asked whether I agreed. No one even looked at my face to see how I felt. To them, I was simply a piece of property, waiting to be divided. Vanessa turned toward me, lips curved in an innocent smile. "Since you're not saying anything, that means you're okay with it, right? I won't be a bother. I just need one bedroom, a desk, and if you're not using the living room, maybe I could set it up for my art projects." I still said nothing. A part of me wanted to walk out of that party, but another part, the rational one, knew that if I did, I'd be labeled too sensitive, too selfish, unwilling to think of family. I set my glass down, forcing calm. "Mom, Dad, was this discussed beforehand?" My mother turned back to me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Vanessa is going through a hard time. She needs support. And your house is big, quiet, and you live alone. We're only trying to do what's best for both of you. So you all made this decision for me?" My voice wasn't raised, but each word was clear. "Don't put it that way," Mom waved her hand. "You still have the final say. But I believe you won't abandon your sister in this moment." I let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't amusement, it was the laugh of someone realizing they'd been trapped. I looked around the dinner table, a long table lined with fresh flowers, scented candles, ivory tablecloth, everything far too formal for a simple birthday. The details fit together like a painting I had never been allowed to see until now. The mother's fine china, the set she only brought out on major holidays, the seat at the head of the table, given to Vanessa instead of Dad, and the expensive wine Aunt Caroline had brought from California. She would never open it for just an ordinary night. Caroline turned to me, her voice soft. "Allison, how long have you been living alone? Having someone with you could be nice, and sisters living together always makes the bond closer." I glanced at Vanessa, nibbling delicately at a tart, pretending not to hear. "How long have you known about this?" I asked her directly. She shrugged. Only a week or two. I thought the whole family had agreed. Since you didn't say anything, I assumed you were fine with it. And who left your boxes in my garage a few days ago? She blinked, feigning memory. Oh, I asked Mom if I could store them for now. I didn't think you'd be bothered. Bothered? I had to pause to stop myself from spitting out something sharp. Not only had they assumed I'd shoulder more responsibility, they had staged a performance with me as the main character without giving me any lines. My father slapped his palm lightly on the table, not hard, but enough to silence the room. All right, this is getting too tense. Let's just clear the air. Allison, do you have a problem with Vanessa moving in? If you do, just say it, this is family. I looked at him, my chest heavy with bitterness. The problem is, no one asked me before. No one gave me the right to say yes or no. You all just decided, and left me to nod afterward, like always. The table fell silent. My mother's face flushed red. Caroline coughed softly. Vanessa stared at me, that night truly uneasy. I am not responsible for fixing everyone else's mistakes, I said, my voice steady now. And my house is not a halfway shelter. It's my space, my achievement, the only place I feel safe. No one responded. I stood, politely nodded, and walked out of the dining room. Behind me, the sound of cutlery on plates grew faint, then disappeared. But inside me, a decision had crystallized. One I knew had no turning back. I drove away from the party, my chest still burning with anger and a hollow kind of grief. Streetlights streaked across my windshield like cold cuts of light, while recent memories surfaced one by one, like mud stirred up after a storm. Things I had brushed aside, telling myself not to make a fuss, now stood out in sharp relief. 3 days ago, opening the garage to grab an old box, I saw 2 large plastic tubs neatly stacked against the wall. Labeled in marker, Vanessa's winter clothes, and art books handle with care. I had assumed maybe Mom was helping her store things. I sighed, closed the door, and didn't ask. I was used to telling myself not to make a big deal whenever I felt irritated, but now it was clear those boxes were the first steps of a plan already in motion. Last weekend, while dropping off some homemade jam at Mom's, I came in through the back without calling. She was in the kitchen, phone on speaker. Aunt Caroline's voice carried clearly. Allison lives alone in that big house, and Vanessa struggles every day. Shuffling things around a bit makes perfect sense. I froze by the fridge, jam jar still in hand. Mom replied, I agree. Allison just isn't used to sharing her space, but she'll come around. Sisters have to help each other when it matters. I had walked in, placed the jar on the counter without a word, then excused myself with a fake urgent call. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd been cast into a role I had never agreed to play. I remembered every time the family had rescued Vanessa from her mistakes, never holding her accountable. 8 months ago, Mom called me at work, saying Vanessa was being evicted for missing 3 months' rent. Can you cover it for her? She'll pay you back, I promise. I stayed silent. $7,000. Not small. But I didn't refuse. I wired the money that afternoon, telling myself it was just to keep the peace. 2 years ago, she lost her gallery job after missing deadlines. Mom called again. Vanessa is devastated. Can you take her out to eat and cheer her up? Every time she stumbled, the family looked to me as if I were the anchor to steady the storm Vanessa alone had created. And me? When I needed someone to pick me up from the hospital after collapsing from exhaustion, no one came. When I struggled to launch my business from a moldy rental apartment, they only asked one thing. Are you sure you don't want to go back to accounting? I didn't blame them for not helping. I blamed them for assuming I never needed help. I got home close to midnight. As I opened the door, I smelled faint paint in the hallway. When I turned on the lights, I froze. On the entryway shelf sat a new picture frame, a photo of Vanessa and my mother standing in front of my house, clearly taken recently. I had never printed or framed that photo. In the living room, a new pillow rested on the couch, embroidered with the words, "Sisters make the best roommates." The air grew heavy. This was no longer my home. It was a battleground they had already begun to occupy, corner by corner. I went to my bedroom, opened my laptop, and scrolled through my saved real estate contacts. My finger stopped at a familiar name, Patricia Hargrove, the agent who had helped me buy this house 7 years ago. I typed a short message, "Patricia, I need to discuss reappraisal. I'm considering selling." Send. Not 2 minutes later, she called back. Her voice was steady, just as I remembered. "Allison, you're thinking of leaving that house? What happened?" I stepped onto the porch, staring at the old maple trees swaying in the night breeze. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I think I need to rearrange everything." She hesitated only a moment, then said firmly, "I'll be at the office at 11 a.m. Bring any documents you have." I hung up the phone, not exactly relieved, but something inside my chest began to shift. It felt like the breath of someone who had been suffocated for far too long. When I walked back into the house, I removed the photo frame from the shelf and slid it gently into a drawer. The sweet little pillow I placed to the side. Tomorrow morning it would go into the donate box. Some things look harmless, but when placed in the wrong space, they can remind you just how much of your life you've allowed to slip out of your control, and I was far too familiar with that feeling. I arrived early for my appointment, parking outside Patricia's office just as the sun rose above the roofline across the street. The coffee in my hand was still hot, but my heart felt cold. I sat there for a while, watching people stream along the sidewalk, my fingers unconsciously gripping the file stamped with bold letters, "Purchase Agreement, 74 Crestwood Lane." Patricia stepped out through the glass doors, her silver hair neatly tied back, her smile as steady as always, calm, never pushy. She motioned me inside, then pointed toward a small office at the end of the hall. The soft light spilling across a landscape painting on the wall calmed the storm I carried inside. I placed the file on the desk and opened it. "Please check that everything is in order. The buyers finalized the price last week. I'm just waiting for the bank's confirmation, then I'll sign the official contract." She looked up, surprised. "You really want to sell that house? I remember you once called it your first real home." "Home," I echoed, hollow. "It doesn't feel like one anymore when people pitch tents inside it without asking permission." She nodded slowly, not pressing further. A moment later, she opened her laptop, entered the file number, and confirmed each section. "All the paperwork is in order. Everything is clean legally. If the buyers don't change anything, you'll have 30 days of occupancy under the rent back clause." "Do you plan to stay that long?" I nodded. "At least until I find a new place." Leaving her office, I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't rebelling. I wasn't sulking. I was simply reclaiming a part of my life I had been far too quick to hand over to others. 3 days later, my family hosted an extended family dinner to celebrate my parents' anniversary. I nearly didn't go, but then I thought, some things can't be resolved over the phone. You have to show up, face it, and say what needs to be said. I arrived 10 minutes late. The dining room was more crowded than usual. Uncle Robert had flown in from Michigan, and of course Aunt Caroline was orchestrating everything like the director of a stage play. My parents sat at the center, and Vanessa sat to my mother's right, radiant as if nothing was happening. When my mother saw me, she smiled softly. "Allison, you came. I was afraid you'd be upset about the other night and stay away." I pulled out a chair, set my leather bag beside it, my hands tight around the large envelope in my lap. "I'm not upset, but I do have something to share." Vanessa sipped her wine, smiling. "If this is about me moving in, don't worry, I've already packed everything. Just say the day, and I'll be there." I placed the envelope on the table. Actually, Vanessa, you won't be moving in, because that house isn't mine anymore. The room froze. Aunt Caroline stopped cutting meat. Uncle Robert frowned, and my mother's hand halted midair, wine glass trembling. My father asked, "What are you talking about, Allison?" I opened the envelope, spread the documents across the table. I sold the house last week. The buyers are a young couple moving here from Denver. It was a good offer, and the contract is waiting for bank approval. Vanessa shot to her feet, knocking her glass to the floor. Red wine splattered across the white tablecloth like a sudden wound. "You're joking. You sold the house just to keep me out?" I stayed calm. "I sold it because my finances weren't sustainable anymore. If you think I did it only because of you, then you're giving yourself too much importance in my life." My mother stood. "Allison, you can't do this. That house has been your home for nearly 10 years. You love it. Don't act like a sulky child." I pulled out my phone, opened a screenshot. A group chat titled Vanessa's Room appeared, with messages between Mom, Aunt Caroline, and Vanessa, pictures of wallpaper samples, rugs, bookshelves, even suggestions for a Pisces-themed bedside lamp. I set the phone on the table, screen facing them. "This is what you all planned, without asking me. My house. Not one of you asked if I was willing." Aunt Caroline's voice softened. "Allison, we just didn't want you living alone too long. Sisters sharing space. What's so wrong with that? Sharing is not the same as taking," I said, locking eyes with her. "And being alone is not the same as being lonely if it's a choice I make." My father pressed firmly. "You can just cancel the contract. There's time to reconsider." I replied instantly, "No. I signed the deposit agreement, and the buyers have already paid. This isn't emotional. I thought it through. That house suffocated me with imposed expectations. I need to start fresh." Silence. Vanessa sank back into her chair, tense. My mother closed her eyes briefly, swallowing her anger, then asked quietly, "So where will you go?" "I'm looking for a townhouse up north. Smaller, closer to work, less pressure. And no one has a key but me." I gathered the documents back into my bag. The room was strangely still, the clink of a spoon at the far end sharp in the quiet. I stood, pulled on my coat. "Thank you for dinner. If anyone needs a copy of the contract to believe I'm serious, I can send it." I walked away without looking back. The door closed behind me like a period. Not an ending, but a break I needed. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because of my alarm, but because of the non-stop notifications flashing on my phone. My eyes were heavy, my head thick, but the weight in my chest kept me from touching the screen. I knew what was waiting, not work emails or cheerful greetings, but the fallout from last night. The first message was from a cousin in Florida I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Allison, what happened?" Vanessa said, "She's about to sleep in her car because you wouldn't let her stay." I'm honestly shocked. The second was from Uncle Gary. "I thought you were decent and educated, but I guess you're just small-minded. Family is supposed to help each other, not abandon your own sister." I sat up, tossed the blanket aside, eyes glued to the screen as though each word was draining me. Dozens more messages poured in. Some short, "Disappointed in you," or "You're selfish beyond belief." Others stretched into 3 long paragraphs, like people had been waiting years for a chance to judge me. A call came through. The name on the screen, Aunt Nancy. I let it ring out. Then another, "Lisa, my colleague from marketing." I hesitated, then answered. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Allison." Her voice dropped, hesitant. "Can I ask you something? I don't mean to pry, but this morning I ran into Vanessa at the coffee shop. She looked awful. She said you kicked her out, that you sold the house just so she wouldn't have anywhere to go." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. "What else did she say?" "That you don't want anyone around. That you think you're too successful to put up with a failure." Allison, I don't believe it, but people at the office are talking. In the strategy meeting this morning, when you weren't there, they thought maybe you were hiding. Hiding? I gave a short laugh. Lisa, I just announced I sold the house I spent nearly 10 years building. Does no one consider finances as a reason? She paused. I get it. I just wanted to warn you. If there's anything I can do, let me know. I thanked her and hung up. But staring at my phone, I realized the most painful part wasn't the accusations, it was how quickly the false story had spread. Vanessa had spun it into a tale where I was the perfect villain, cold, calculating, cruel to my own sister. And the part that hurt most wasn't that she lied, but that so many people were willing to believe it. That afternoon, walking into the office, I felt eyes linger on me longer than usual. No one spoke, but they didn't need to. Their silence was enough. A few glanced down at their screens the second I entered, as if afraid of being dragged into muddy water. I headed straight to my desk, powered up my computer. Less than a minute later, there was a light knock. It was Thomas, a colleague, the only one who had once sat beside me through late nights waiting for payroll to clear. He walked in, set a hot cup of tea on my desk. "Looks like you're catching some bad press," he said, sitting across from me. "I don't buy it. But are you all right?" I nodded. "Feels like I stepped on an anthill and now the whole colony is crawling up my legs." Thomas gave a dry chuckle. "I've been there. It's not easy, especially when your voice gets twisted by someone else." I looked at him, grateful for his honesty, his lack of judgment. "Last night," I said, "I wasn't angry at anyone. I just wanted control of my own life. But that seems like the perfect excuse for everyone to call me a traitor." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "Do you know why people believe Vanessa so easily? Because she looks weak. And you don't. You're strong, successful, independent. People don't know how to empathize with someone who doesn't crumble." I didn't reply. His words slipped under my armor like a needle through cloth. I had been strong for so long, so used to not being allowed to falter, that when I needed someone to defend me, I didn't even know where to turn. That evening, as I walked through my door, my phone rang again. This time it was Uncle Robert. I hesitated, then answered. "Allison," he said immediately, "I just got off the phone with your mother. She was crying. She said you're unstable, not acting normal." "What's going on?" I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply. "Uncle, I'm not losing control. I just don't want to be treated like an emergency shelter for my sister every time she crashes into life." "But you've left her with nowhere to go." "That's not true," I said, my voice lowering. "She has her own apartment. She has our parents. She has plenty of people willing to take her in. The only difference is that I'm no longer one of them. I'm not the default option anymore." My uncle was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not taking sides. But maybe what your family needs is a real sit-down, to put everything on the table." I set the phone down, my chest heavy as lead. Not because he scolded me, but because I realized this fight wasn't just about protecting the privacy of a house. It was about reclaiming my worth in a family that had grown comfortable living by assumptions. I sat in the kitchen, the yellow light from the hanging lamp pooling over the papers spread across the table. My laptop screen glowed beside a cup of tea gone cold, and the wall clock had just ticked past 2:17 a.m. Outside the window, the wind stirred the maple branches, their shadows scattering across the damp wall. I couldn't remember how long I had been sitting there, nor how many nights I had spent awake with numbers and expenses stretching endlessly across the page. That spring, floodwater seeped through the roof, soaking 3 bedrooms. I called 2 insurance companies, both of them giving me the same chilling answer. Natural damage isn't covered under your current policy. The roof repairs cost $15,000. I paid by draining the savings I had set aside for a winter trip to Vermont and borrowing another 4,000 from the bank at an interest rate that was far from kind. I had barely caught my breath when the main pipe burst. Water flooded part of the laundry room, ruining the dryer and some of the electrical system. The water company denied responsibility, calling it an internal issue, and the repairman quoted 8,500, plus nearly 1,000 to restore the torn-up yard. I tried to hold things together. Those weeks, I turned down every lunch invitation at work, canceled every streaming service, even postponed a dental appointment. I lived on toast and hard-boiled eggs for 2 weeks just to keep up with payments. Then the heating system failed right in the middle of June. That summer had been unusually cold. One evening after work, I walked into the house and felt the chill hanging in the air, a silent sign that everything was slipping beyond my reach. I flipped every switch, checked the breakers, called in a technician. He glanced at it and said the thermostat had failed completely and the entire system needed replacing. Cost: $6,000. I had no emergency funds left, no intention of borrowing more. I was left with only one choice: sell the house, cut down expenses, and find a place where I could finally breathe. I found a small townhouse up north, about a 15-minute drive from the office, compact with 2 bedrooms, east-facing windows, and a balcony overlooking young maples. The total living costs were nearly 40% lower than in my current house. I had gone over the numbers carefully, spoken with my financial advisor, and for the first time in months, I could imagine a life not buried under unpaid bills. But to my family, all of that was ignored. Last night, during the cold dinner they called intimate, I kept my composure while my mother sighed in front of relatives. Allison refused to help her sister, even though she's doing just fine. She even sold her house just to dodge responsibility. No one asked whether that responsibility had ever been the reason I had to strain until I broke. No one saw how many nights I sat among bills as if fighting a war without allies. No one knew how my hands shook signing the bank loan papers. They only saw the Allison they had drawn in their minds, strong, steady, needing no one, with no valid reason to ever say no. I leaned back in my chair, hand on the stack of invoices sorted by date. Each sheet was a cut into the stability I thought I had built. The house that had once been my pride was now just an echoing shell of arguments and blame. I flipped to the page with detailed notes: roof repair costs, payment dates, contractor names, before and after photos. I didn't keep these for pity. I kept them so when the time came, I could lay them in front of my family, and no one could call me heartless without seeing the truth. In my mind, I saw my father standing that night, palms slamming on the table, his eyes fixed on me. "You don't get to make all the decisions yourself." I had answered, not in anger, but with steady clarity. "I've carried everything on my own for 10 years. This family only notices me when they need something. But when I need something, where is everyone?" No one replied. I stood, closed my laptop, and packed everything neatly into a large manila envelope. Tomorrow I would bring it to the family meeting Uncle Robert had just arranged. I wouldn't shout, wouldn't give a long speech. I would simply hand over the documents. Because I had learned that sometimes the truth doesn't need words, it only needs to be placed at the right time, in front of the right people, without apology. The meeting was set for Saturday evening at Uncle Robert's house, a 3-story wood home in the western suburbs, once the gathering place for every holiday. That night, I drove there as the sky turned amber and the early September wind rattled the wind chimes on the porch, as if announcing something was about to unfold. I walked in, clutching the file like armor. Inside, the air smelled of toasted bread and wax candles, but beneath it lingered tension in every glance. My mother sat in the middle of the sofa, hands clenched tightly. Vanessa beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. My father stood by the fireplace, where he always gave Christmas blessings. To the left were Uncle Robert, Aunt Caroline, and my cousin Emily. I also noticed Dorothy, my closest friend for 10 years, Mark, my financial advisor, and Jason, my colleague from the media firm. No one smiled when I entered. Only Dorothy gave a small nod, her gaze warm like a blanket in winter. "Thank you for coming," Uncle Robert said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk openly. The family can't stay divided like this." I placed the envelope on the wooden table, opened it. The papers lay in order: roof repair invoices, photos, bank statements, plumbing receipts, and finally, the financial plan Mark and I had worked on for 3 weeks. "I never meant to divide anyone," I said calmly, "but I think you all need to see the whole picture before you keep calling me heartless." I handed out each sheet around the table. "Here's the roof bill after the rain soaked 3 bedrooms. No insurance covered it. Here's the plumbing invoice for the burst pipe. Here's the heating replacement, something that should have lasted another 10 years. And here are the bank statements, after I drained my reserves and even pulled from retirement." No one spoke. Vanessa looked down. My mother paused over the third invoice, her eyes catching on the $6,000 total, blinking as though only now realizing the numbers were real. Mark spoke, his tone as even as when he addressed major clients. "I've been Allison's financial advisor for 3 years. She's never missed a payment. When 3 major crises hit within 6 months, her only rational move to stay financially secure was to sell and downsize." Jason nodded. "I work with Allison. She's first in, last out every day. None of us think she's someone who gives up. If anyone deserves to be called a pillar, it's her." Dorothy straightened, her gaze unwavering. "I've seen Allison live on instant noodles for 10 days just to make a mortgage payment." "Vanessa?" She turned to my sister. "I can't recall you ever doing that." Vanessa's face flushed. "I'm trying. She doesn't need to humiliate me in front of outsiders." "I'm not humiliating you," I said. "I'm presenting the truth, because it seems everyone has forgotten how many times you've been bailed out." My mother snapped, her voice louder than usual. "And what if she has? She's your sister. When you succeed, you're supposed to pull her up, not cast her off like trash." "I've pulled enough," I answered, meeting her gaze. But when I slipped, no one looked down to see me struggling. Silence fell. No clinking of silverware, no sharp breaths. My father stepped away from the fireplace, closer to me. "You sold the house without telling us. You made it seem like the family was a burden." I lifted my head. "It's not you who are the burden, it's the limitless expectations. No one's ever asked if I was okay, only how much more I could give." Uncle Robert nodded, breaking the tension. "Allison has the right to decide her life. Selling the house wasn't a tantrum, it was a sound decision given the circumstances. As for Vanessa needing a place, the family can find a Miss Cassidy solution together." Aunt Caroline leaned toward my mother, whispering something. I didn't catch it, but my mother turned to Vanessa. "You can stay with us for a while. There's still the spare room upstairs. We'll figure out the rest." Vanessa bit her lip. "I don't want to go back to my old room. I need space to grow." Jason leaned forward, gaze direct. "To grow, sometimes you have to start with a real job. Maybe it's not glamorous, but it's the first step toward independence." I reached into my bag, pulled out another envelope, set it in front of Vanessa. "Last week, my company opened an entry-level marketing position. The pay's enough for a small studio. I spoke to HR. If you want, they're ready to interview you." Vanessa opened it, her eyes scanning the sheet. "I'm not some freeloader." "No one said you were," I replied softly. "But if you don't want to be called that, then prove it." No one spoke again. I stood, folded the documents carefully into my bag. Mark, Dorothy, and Jason rose too. My father's eyes lingered on my hand, gripping the bag, then shifted to my mother. His face was heavy, as though he had just realized something difficult to face. My mother turned to the window, one hand pressing the hem of her blouse, silent. The living room felt subdued after my offer to Vanessa. She kept her gaze lowered, fixed on the job posting I had set before her. Her shoulders moved slightly, then she looked up, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. "Do you think I've never tried?" I looked at her. "No one said you've never tried, but you've never finished. You always start, then walk away, and there's always someone behind you catching the fall." Uncle Robert, who had stayed calm throughout, suddenly clasped his hands, his eyes sharp. "Vanessa, I want to ask seriously. Are you working anywhere right now?" My sister hesitated, glanced at our mother, then avoided everyone's eyes. "I'm waiting on the right opportunity. I have a few freelance design projects pending." "Pending?" His brows rose. "You've been at home 3 months. Before that, you had a gallery job for 2 months. How much longer before the right opportunity arrives?" Vanessa bit her lip. I saw her hands clenched in her lap. Aunt Caroline jumped in, as if her silence was a cue for rescue. "Robert, she's at an age where not having direction is normal. Everyone has their own pace. Allison's just different. She stabilized early, so she forgets what it feels like to be uncertain." I turned to her, my voice soft but firm. "Aunt Caroline, I haven't forgotten. I just never had the privilege of drifting in it." Across from me, Emily, my cousin, usually quiet at these gatherings, spoke up suddenly. "I remember when Allison first graduated. She worked days, took night classes, and even worked weekends at a bookstore. Did anyone in this family ever help her with tuition?" My mother suddenly turned toward Emily, her eyes narrowing with disapproval. But my cousin kept going. "And Vanessa, last year, just her credit card debt alone, Aunt paid off 3,000. Everyone in the family knows it." The atmosphere shifted. Quick glances began to pass among those who had been silently listening. Uncle Robert leaned back, thoughtful. Aunt Caroline, with nothing left to refute, stayed quiet. My mother sat upright, but her hands clenched tightly on her knees. I turned to Vanessa. "It's not your fault that you were helped. But if you see it as a given right, then no one can help you grow up." Vanessa's breathing quickened, her eyes red. "Everyone here thinks I'm a burden. I'm tired of being compared, of being scrutinized with every step. I'm not Allison, and I'll never be Allison." I said nothing. Because I knew those words weren't aimed at me, they were the frustration she had carried for years. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "I don't need anyone's advice anymore. I don't need the job you offered. I don't need anyone's pity." My mother reached out to stop her, but Vanessa strode quickly to the door. The sharp sound of heels on wood, the door opening and slamming shut, it was like scissors cutting through the last threads of effort holding the room together. No one followed. No one called her name. Only silence lingered. I glanced at my father. He didn't look at me, nor at the door. He just stared down at his hands, slowly twisting his worn wedding ring. My mother leaned forward, as if about to speak, then straightened again, her shoulders stiff. Aunt Caroline pulled a handkerchief from her purse and set it on her lap, but didn't wipe her eyes. She just sat still, staring at the empty space in the middle of the table. I stood and gathered the papers still scattered across the table. Mark quietly helped stack them. Jason handed me my coat, his look discreet but warm. Dorothy gave my hand a gentle squeeze as I passed her chair. No one stopped me when I walked out of that house. And I didn't need them to. Their silence was acknowledgement enough. No more accusations, no more condemning eyes, just a hollow space, a space I no longer had to fill with my own endurance. I arrived home just before 10 p.m. Driving back from Uncle Robert's, I hadn't turned on music or GPS like usual. I let everything stay quiet, the steady hum of the tires against the road calming my uneven heartbeat. My familiar house appeared under the streetlights, a soft glow spilling from the kitchen window where I'd left the light on. I set my bag on the table, poured a glass of water, and walked into my office, the place where I had spent countless nights sorting through bills and numbers the family dismissed as too meticulous. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out another file, thicker and heavier than the financial documents I'd just presented. This file wasn't for defense but for comparison. Not to accuse, but to shine light on a history my family insisted was equal. The next morning, I emailed Uncle Robert saying I wanted to share one more document with everyone. I attached a detailed ledger I had compiled myself, a summary of every expense my parents had covered for Vanessa over the past 5 years. I hadn't taken anything from others or eavesdropped. Every entry could be traced, bank transfers. Mom had forwarded me with notes like temporary loan, Vanessa's tuition bill I'd seen left on the kitchen counter last year, the car repair Dad once mentioned over lunch at the Italian restaurant, or the furniture receipt Vanessa posted online, thanking Mom for sponsoring. I hadn't speculated. I had recorded exactly what was there, each item, each number, each date, no commentary, no emotion. The total, once added up, was $212,480. On Monday morning, I returned to the office. Jason walked in carrying 2 cups of hot coffee and set one on my desk. "You look better," he said. "Maybe because I've stopped waiting for something that will never come," I replied, opening the lid and letting the steam wash away the last of my fatigue. That afternoon, I got a call from my mother. This time, I answered. "Allison," her voice was lower than usual. "I read the document you sent." I waited a few seconds, silent. She went on. "You made it so detailed, I don't remember it ever being that much." "Neither did I said. "Not until I had to put it all together and ask myself why I'm always the one called selfish." She stayed quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing, faint but unsteady. "Your father sat and read it all last night. He didn't say a word, just sat at the table, turning each page over and over." I nodded softly, though she couldn't see me. "I didn't think I was showing that much favoritism," she said, her voice almost like a confession. "I just thought Vanessa was weaker, needed more support. And you were always strong. You never asked for anything, so I assumed you were fine." "Not asking doesn't mean not needing," I said slowly. "It just means knowing there's no one to ask." She didn't reply, but I felt the shift. For the first time in years, I heard something in her voice beyond excuses or defense. A pause deep enough to begin realizing. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. In my hand was the reorganized file, neatly arranged. I placed it in the safe where I kept my most important papers, not to hold as ammunition, but to remind myself that I hadn't imagined the unfairness. It had been real, and I had endured it with effort no one else had witnessed. Around 9 p.m., I received a message from an unknown number, just one line. "Can I see you this weekend?" I checked the number. It was Vanessa. The text had no sad face, no apology, just a simple question, but to me it carried something different. No more accusations. No more assumptions that I had to say yes. I typed back slowly. "If you want to talk, I'll be there. Nothing more." I set the phone down and turned off the kitchen light. In the gentle dark, I no longer felt alone. I didn't feel triumphant either, just calm, a rare feeling, one I knew had taken me a very long road to find. I moved into my new apartment on a Friday morning, clear skies and a light breeze. The townhouse in Northridge was much smaller than my old house, no backyard, no 2-car garage, but in return, I had just enough quiet and a balcony facing a row of maples turning their leaves. The living room was neat, light wood floors, and the morning sun streaming through the curtains kept it bright without a lamp. I bought nothing new. Everything I brought were pieces I had chosen to keep after long nights of sorting. A few wooden bookshelves, a ceramic tea set I'd picked up at a Local fare last year, a faded reading chair with worn armrests. I was living with less, but I felt fuller than ever. Work was steady, my income enough to cover everything without scrutinizing every bank line. In the mornings, I brewed coffee, opened the window, and watched the sunlight filter through the leaves without worrying about sudden repair bills or roles I'd never chosen. A week after Vanessa's message, she still hadn't reached out again. I wasn't anxious, nor did I speculate. Maybe she needed time. Maybe she had chosen another path. Either way, I meant what I'd said. If she needed me, I'd be there. On Saturday afternoon, while I was arranging books, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there stood Vanessa, in a pale green coat, hair tied back, holding a small bag. "Can I come in?" she asked, her eyes cautious instead of defiant. I stepped aside, gently closing the door as she entered. The house was quiet, only the occasional sound of cars outside. She stood in the living room for a moment, looking around. "Neat, clean, and very you," she said, a small smile on her lips. "I like it that way," I replied, motioning her toward the chair opposite the tea table. She didn't start right away. Her fingers fiddled with the zipper on her bag. I poured tea, set a cup in front of her, asked nothing. "I went to the interview," she said after a long silence. "A small office on the third floor of your company's building. Marketing department. They need someone to edit documents and help with social media content. Not too creative, but I could learn a lot." I nodded. "I know, they told me on Wednesday you came." Vanessa's shoulders slumped. "I wasn't going to go, honestly. I felt ashamed. Taking a job you found felt like admitting failure. But I'm tired of pretending I don't need anyone, when clearly I'm drowning." I looked at her without judgment. Being self-reliant doesn't mean rejecting every chance. What matters is where you start, and whether you keep going. She was quiet, her face eased. A steadiness seemed to return to the space between us, something we hadn't shared in years. "Does Mom know you're working yet?" I asked. "No," she said. "I want to last a few weeks before telling her. In case I don't make it past probation." I smiled. "I believe you'll get through." She pulled a small business card from her pocket and set it on the table. I looked down at the neat print. Vanessa Rhodes, Assistant Marketing Coordinator. "This is the first real work card I've ever had," she said, lifting her eyes, bright with a hint of pride. "Not a student ID, not a temporary collaborator." I raised my teacup and tapped it lightly against the card on the table, a quiet toast. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at Uncle Robert's. My mother called at noon, asking both of us to come, not to rehash old arguments, but to share a real meal. I arrived 10 minutes after Vanessa. She was already at the table, wearing a simple navy dress, her hair down. Mom served the roast we both loved, and Dad was pouring wine steadily, his hands no longer trembling the way they had at tense meals before. "Vanessa has some good news to share with everyone," my mother said, her gaze steady, not favoring anyone in particular. Vanessa stood, pulled a business card from her purse, and held it up for the table to see. "I've officially been hired, a full-time job. The starting salary is enough for me to rent a studio apartment near the office. I moved out of Mom's house yesterday." My father set his glass down, nodding, his eyes showing both surprise and satisfaction. "Good, very good." Aunt Caroline smiled, though clearly taken aback. "Where are you planning to live?" "I rented an apartment in the Linwood area, near the train station," Vanessa answered quickly. "Not too fancy, but it has a small kitchen. And an east-facing window." My mother turned to me, placing her hand on the table. "Allison, did you take her there?" I shook my head. "No." Vanessa found it herself and signed the lease. She handled everything. Vanessa glanced at me, then smiled. The mood in the room grew lighter. No comparisons, no jabs or insinuations, just simple questions and ordinary well wishes. That night, as I was leaving, my mother walked me to the door. Before I stepped onto the porch, she held my hand. I was wrong to think you didn't need anything. I didn't reply. I just squeezed her hand gently and stepped out into the glow of the streetlights. Our shadows stretched long across the cobblestones, parallel but no longer distant. One weekend evening, I opened the door to welcome my closest friends into my small townhouse. Warm golden light filled the tidy living room, the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread drifting through the air. On the table, I had laid out bottles of wine, salad, and a cheese platter. Dorothy brought a bouquet of bright sunflowers, Mark carried a fruit tart, and Jason smiled as he lifted a bottle of vintage Italian wine. "This is so you," Dorothy said as she stepped inside, her eyes lighting up. "Not too big, but just right. Every corner feels like it breathes your spirit." I smiled, taking the flowers and placing them in the clear glass vase I had prepared. I wanted this place not to be anyone else's copy, just the space I truly chose. We gathered around the table, glasses of wine shimmering in the light. When I raised my glass, everyone followed. "To this house," I said, my voice steady and calm, "the house of freedom and boundaries." The soft clink of glasses rang out, followed by laughter and lively conversation. As the evening carried on, a sense of peace spread through me, something I had lost for years in my old home. About half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. I stepped out to open it and found Vanessa standing there holding a thick folder, her eyes nervous but without the old defiance. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded and stepped aside. The room quieted when she entered, but there was no tension, only expectant eyes. Vanessa set the folder on the coffee table and sat down. "I have a favor to ask. This is the budget I've made for the next 6 months. I wrote down every detail: rent, groceries, savings. But I'm not sure I balanced it right. Can you look it over for me?" I opened the papers. The lines were neatly written, with dates and projected amounts. I read carefully, a hard-to-describe feeling welling up inside me. No avoidance, no performance. This was real effort. "You've done really well," I said, setting the pages down. "You just need to adjust a little. For example, cut back slightly on shopping. Instead, put more into your emergency fund. That way you'll feel safer if something unexpected happens." Vanessa nodded, jotting it down. "I want to handle everything myself. I don't want Mom or Dad having to bail me out again." The atmosphere softened. My mother, sitting quietly in the corner of the sofa, lowered her head, her eyes glistening. My father sat beside her, his broad hand resting on hers, a silent gesture of agreement. In their eyes, I saw not just regret, but a fragile glimmer of hope. Dorothy spoke up, breaking the heaviness. "I think tonight we're witnessing a turning point. Vanessa, you've taken steps many people are too afraid to even start." Mark nodded. "I've told clients for years that independence isn't just about earning money, it's about knowing how to use it so you don't end up back at square one." "Vanessa, you're on the right track." Jason lifted his glass with a grin. "I'd say both sisters have found their place now." Vanessa turned to me, her eyes warmer. "I used to think you always wanted to prove you were better than me, but now I see you just wanted me out of the cycle." Thank you," I smiled faintly. "I don't need thanks. I just want you to hold on to what you're building." The room filled with conversation again. Dinner went on with an unusual lightness. No hidden comparisons, no indirect reproaches. Just small talk about her new job, the food on the table, the book I had just finished. As everyone was preparing to leave, my mother stepped forward, laying her hand on my shoulder. "Allison," she said slowly, "I can't change what I did in the past. But I want to learn how to listen to you instead of imposing." I looked at her, not replying right away. Then I nodded. "If you're ready to listen, then I'm ready to share." Her eyes brightened for a moment. My father nodded too, and together they walked toward the door. When I turned back, I saw Vanessa still sitting at the table, Slipping the budget papers back into her bag, she stood and came closer, her voice low. Next week, I have my first team meeting. I want to do well, to prove I can. You don't need to prove anything to anyone but yourself, I answered. She smiled, then gave me a brief hug before heading out. When the house was quiet again, I stood alone on the balcony. The night breeze carried the scent of maple leaves. I looked out at the wide sky, a simple truth echoing inside me. Family isn't a burden to be carried, it's a place where people grow together. And to make that possible, each person must first stand on their own feet. I once thought family was a chain I couldn't escape, but now I understood that boundaries don't break family ties. They make them respected and lasting. And in that moment, I knew I had taught my family a lesson they would never learn from any celebration. Love isn't giving without limits, it's helping each other grow in freedom and responsibility. What about you? What do you think about boundaries in a family? Where is the balance between love and responsibility? I truly want to hear your thoughts because your story might shine a light for someone else struggling with the same pain. If this journey resonates with you, leave your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to the channel. I'll keep sharing more stories with you. Stories about family, about relationships that are both warm and complicated, and about the search for ourselves within them.